The theology of the avatar. Who am I? Am I a whole person? What does it mean to be human? What is humanity? It's been suggested these questions are at the centre of theological and philosophical concern, but that we are just avatars living in this world, inhabiting our bodies, which change, develop, then ultimately erode in the grave. We use the phrases in real life or to meet in person, as if when we're online, we're not real or there personally, just represented by our avatar or computer screen. The same person is there whether it's on site or online. And my presentation will cover 5 areas: an introduction to the avatar and metaverse. How do we define relationships? Looking at Aristotle and BIAPT. Are avatars made in our image or in the image of God as we are? Are we really actually, in the day, in section 4, just all avatars? And then I'll bring it to our conclusion. So when we think about avatars and the metaverse, what do we actually mean? I mean, originally, an avatar was a manifestation of the divine in a human form, seen predominantly in Hinduism, the descent of the God from heaven to earth. However, the event of the metaverse avatar is taken on a different context. It is the representation of a real person who is controlling the avatar. The avatar cannot exist without the real person. If the avatar speaks, it's the actual human who is speaking. When the real person stops the game or the app ceases, well, the avatar ceases to exist. Of course, during games, avatars may be injured or killed, but the real person, unless wearing a haptic suit, would not be impacted. One of the most popular terms of the word avatar is when it's described as the digital self-representation of participants in the virtual world. And there have been several films, you may have seen them, featuring avatars, the 2009 film and part 2 that's released last year, where a former disabled Marine becomes part of the avatar program and uses technology to part his intelligence into a remotely located figure. The human body is static during this process. Ready Player One in 2018 featured an avatar who represented the user wearing a haptic suit. So when the avatar felt pain, so did the human. The avatar is a representation of a real person, as it cannot speak or move without the embodied person operating it. And as Dr. Phillips argues, humans experience mutual presence. It is better in the physical, but it's wrong to say that it's the only presence. And Sherry Turkle describes virtual experiences as serious play, and we should use our experiences there to comprehend the real. And Christopher Helen said it allows the Christians to be present and have the feeling of being there. Talk about church in virtual worlds. And yet, really, the avatar is just a visible representation of the invisible. When I'm attending church with my avatar, you see my avatar, but you don't see me, although you can hear me. But is this avatar just a body that we use to engage in an environment? Perhaps no different from the body that we use to engage in our work, relationships, religious activities. When you go to work, we put on perhaps work clothes, or when we go to church, we put on, perhaps not so much these days, but we used to put on our Sunday best. I remember my grandparents talking about, well, we got our Sunday best, a type of avatar that they would put on in order to go to church to present the right impression. When we go and play sports, we put on an avatar, the right equipment. So we use different types of avatars, and in these instances and in the metaverse. And of course, we talk a lot about the metaverse, and it is a big, wide term. It first appeared in Neil Stephenson's 1992 science fiction novel Snow Crash, where a virtual environment where lifelike avatars engage with each other. But 30 years on, it's still a vision that Silicon Valley are heavily investing in. In August 21, Facebook changed its name to Meta to focus on the virtual world. Access is primarily gained through headsets. Zuckerberg said the defining quality of the metaverse will be a feeling of presence, like you're really there with another person or in another place. Feeling truly present with another person is the ultimate dream of social technology. That is why we're so focused on building this. Some people say, well, the metaverse is just simply the next generation of the internet, or infinite worlds that connect the physical with the digital. It merges virtual reality, augmented reality, and physical reality. The metaverse is a cyberspace where users create their avatars interactions for various social, educational, religious, and economic purposes. And as I said, it can be accessed via a headset, or some programs you can access from the computer. And the avatar is designed by the operator, and images can be changed for different programs or different games. I can design my avatar with whatever sex I want, any ethnicity, any features, any clothing. There is no rules. The only part that remains part of me is the voice. And of course, there are various churches, predominantly American, using different platforms. The church that I'm involved in, Lakeland Community Church, we use big screen, and we project the on-site service via YouTube into big screen. And attendance numbers range around 25 to 30 each week. Some stay for a short time, some stay for the whole service. But how do we build relationships with them? Sven Nyholm, in his paper, Can a Robot Be a Good Colleague?, highlights 3 areas identified by Aristotle in his work Nicomachean Ethics, where Aristotle defines friendship in 3 categories. We see utility, pleasure, and virtue. In utility friendship, the parties are useful to each other. In pleasure friendships, the parties get pleasure from their interactions. And then virtue relationships is where it's based on shared values, common interests, and the perceived virtues in one another. And the parties develop and go through life together. It could be argued in the metaverse, the friendship is primarily developed through the virtue within the church with shared values and a common interest, which we then develop through other platforms outside the metaverse like Discord or Zoom. But yet, we are useful in that we are providing a service for people to come to. People get pleasure perhaps from attending the service and hearing the worship or the speaker. But the difficulty really is unless the person engages and joins other platforms, then they remain anonymous, especially as you could change your avatar and name periodically or even every other week. So how do we engage them? Well, according to Danaher, what is important is if the avatar can behave as you would expect a friend to. Again, it opens a wide area of discussion. What do we expect from our friends? But in the metaverse, we've made some friends, and we've now started a disciple group where we meet weekly on Discord, holding each other to account for our Christian journey. but can we build these relationships? Karl Barth in Church Dogmatics, the Doctrine of Creation, he sets 4 criteria for an authentic relationship, namely visibility, looking the other in the eye, communication, speak and hear to one another, activity, rendering mutual assistance, and finally emotions, doing it gladly. Hertzfield, in her 2023 book, The Artifice of Intelligence, examined these 4 criteria in relation to artificial intelligence and robots, which provides a good foundation to build on. But as our book explains, AI fails at the 4th hurdle predominantly, doing it gladly. It does not have real emotions. I can ask Alexa, how is she feeling today? And she will answer. But actually, it's just an answer programmed within her technology. Doesn't have any real emotions. And I would suggest that the avatar relationship is different to this because it's human to human as opposed to human to device. Therefore, I can show my emotion in my communication with the other person. And when you think about visibility, looking the other person in the eye, what Barth is speaking about here is not looking the outward form he speaks about, but it's actually looking at the inward form. So it's me as me communicating with you as you. There should be visibility of who I really am. And yet so often, don't we, whether it's in certain circles that we give across the image that we wish to portray. And that leads us on to the image of God. If we are in Christian theology made in the image of God, then how does this affect our relationships within the metaverse and as an avatar? I mean, if you go back to Genesis 1:26 to 27, it says, let us make mankind or humanity in an image, that likeness. And God creates mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he creates them, male and female. And of course, there's various interpretations as to what does this mean, image of God. Johansson's book, The Image of God, it outlines over the centuries how that interpretation has changed. But 2 main interpretations would be von Rad's representative view and Barth's relational approach. Von Rad speaks about just as powerful earthly kings to indicate their claim to dominion, erect an image of themselves in their provinces of their empire, where they do not personally appear. So humanity is placed upon earth in God's image, as God's sovereign emblem. Humanity is really only God's representative, summoned to maintain and enforce God's claim to dominion over the earth. And one says we're like an ambassador here representing God. And this is a good option in relation to avatars. The avatar is my ambassador, but it's a bit different because actually the avatar only can do what I allow it to do. I am still in control. And of course, when it speaks, it is me speaking. Barth's position is the relational approach we have discussed previously, that our relationship with one another reflects God's relationship with us. And it involves both male and female. Charlotte von Kirschbaum, who has been described as Barth's helper, and yet probably is more than that, as she helped him with his theology and developed her own theology, wrote her own books, talks about Adam and Eve, and that Adam as a lonely individual needs a helper. It is a shared experience. And this emerges for the first time with the appearance of the female. She compliments him as his helper. And then we could say, well, the avatar's my helper. It's complementing me. We're working together, just as God created is relational between male and female. So the avatar and myself, we have this relational approach. And we see this slightly in Ubuntu, in the African concept, in which the identity of self is understood to be formed independently through the community. I am because you are. I am in the metaverse because my avatar is. And it's all bound around this relationship. The avatar only exists in tandem with the user. And in one sense, you could argue that the avatar meets both representation and relational criteria. It's a visible representation of the user who is present and the medium through which relationships are built. So are we not all then just avatars? Who is the real me? If we are building a relationship with the person beyond the avatar, is it any different from the relationship we build with people at our sports club or at our gym, at our university or in religious activities? Who am I? Who am I? Whether I'm working, running, preaching, or perhaps walking my dogs. I am me, but I use a different avatar to fulfill those roles. Before I retired from policing, when I went to work, I would put on the uniform and then I represented my force. When I go running, I put on the correct avatar to fulfill that task. Same with preaching. I might put on a different persona when I'm preaching as to when I'm doing different things or use different words. And then when I was perhaps speaking with my wife and then I'm walking the dogs. And there's over 130 different understandings of human ontology. But the most common one for evangelical scholars is the person consists of a visible part, the physical body, and an invisible part, the soul. They're united in life but separated at death. And of course, there are different other interpretations. And Barth's interpretation really of the body follows this, that the body is the vehicle. The visible body represents the objective aspect of human nature. And the invisible soul is the subjective part. Catherine Nagurna suggests personal identity is expressed through an individual's name. But then people change names or use professional ones. In VR, people can change their avatar's name or use different ones in different programs. Although naming is a type of identity attributed to a body, it can be changed. Similar to the physical human body, it is needed to exist, but they deteriorate and we change physically. But the soul is different. As Dr. Paula Gooder suggests, there is no mechanism to change it. And here we come on to the soul is that unique core that makes a person truly human. And she uses the word meanness to describe this real essence of the program. We've got the body, but inside there is this meanness, who I am. And then according to Dr. Gooder, then it can only be fully realized in a relationship with God because it is our identity beyond the grave. And Martin Heidegger, he uses the same sort of term when he's talking about Dasein, that notion of a living being for the activity of being there. And he talks about this thatness, the whatness, I, myselfness. And Gackenbauer and Bowen talk about this now hyper-personal self, where the internet permits the person to create their online personality in a different context from their real identity. And yet, it is still us. Our bodies are important, but we can change them to a certain level and even replace certain organs. But we still need them to exist, even if we don't like them. but we have no mechanism to change the soul. It remains part of ourself and develops over time with experience. And I would suggest that this is similar to our human activities like work, sports, home life, social, religious activities, where we put on an avatar that reflects that environment. It is the meanness or I myselfness that builds a relationship, not the person's persona. And in concluding, I would argue that we are all avatars. I would argue that it's similar to our human activities like work, sports, where we put on an avatar that reflects the environment. It is the meanness or thatness that builds the relationship, not the persona portrayed. We can develop relationships in the metaverse, perhaps different from those we experience on sites, but they are relationships worth developing. I would suggest that it is the meanness or I myselfness that builds a relationship, not the avatar. We are all avatars, putting on a different outfit depending on the role we fill. But whether we are in the metaverse or the office, the meanness remains the same and aids us to build relationships. Thank you for listening.